¿Te has preguntado cuál es el rol de las grandes empresas y sus líderes para impulsar la innovación social corporativa? Eso es justo lo que vamos a tratar de resolver en esta nueva serie de Disruptivo TV con el apoyo de grandes aliados. En las próximas 10 semanas tendremos conversaciones con algunos de los líderes de las empresas más importantes de toda la región. Tenemos una página especial, disruptivo.tv/innovación social corporativa, a la cual te invito a que conozcas, porque además de las entrevistas hay un ebook nuevo con los principales aprendizajes de las conversaciones que tuvimos con estos 10 líderes. Así que no te despegues, suscríbete a nuestros canales de YouTube, Spotify o donde sea que escuchas sus podcasts. Y recuerda, entra a disruptivo.tv/innovación social corporativa para aprender todo acerca de este gran tema. Hola a todas y a todos, ¿cómo están? Yo soy Juan del Cerro y bienvenidos de nuevo a un episodio de Disruptivo. Estoy muy emocionado porque este episodio es parte de esta serie especial de Innovación Social Corporativa y Liderazgo Responsable que estamos haciendo en conjunto con BMW Foundation, Social Lab a nivel Latinoamérica, Sistema B, Empathy y bueno, otras organizaciones aliadas las cuales estamos promoviendo, estamos impulsando el liderazgo responsable, no solo en las pequeñas empresas, sino también en los grandes corporativos. Y hemos estado hablando con grandes líderes de toda América Latina y el día de hoy no es la excepción. El día de hoy tenemos una gran entrevista que me entusiasma muchísimo. Vamos a seguir aprendiendo mucho sobre estrategias de liderazgo responsable e innovación social corporativa. Como ya lo saben, en esta serie especial, algo de lo más padre es que no estoy yo solo haciendo estas entrevistas, sino que me acompañan justamente pues líderes de la red de BMW Foundation que ya son parte y que ya están trabajando por ser líderes responsables. Y bueno, ya estuvo con nosotros en algunas otras entrevistas, pero le damos la bienvenida de nuevo a Rosa Madera, fundadora de Empathy, experta en innovación social, responsabilidad social, liderazgo responsable, a quien nos da muchísimo gusto saludar de nuevo. ¿Cómo estás, Rosa? Bienvenida.
Muy bien, Juan, muchas semanas sin verte. Qué gusto aquí volver a hablar sobre estos temas que tanto nos apasionan. Muchas gracias, aquí de nuevo.
Así es, emocionados, la verdad, porque ya no sé. Además, bueno, hemos ido grabando estos episodios conforme la agenda nos lo permite, entonces no vamos en orden, pero ya llevamos creo que 7, 8 entrevistas, estamos ya por terminar la serie y la verdad no sé exactamente ese episodio qué número sea, pero me da mucho gusto volvernos a ver porque además contigo grabamos al principio y no nos habíamos visto, así que Rosa, pues encantado de estar por acá. Rosa, cuéntanos un poco acerca de nuestro invitado del día de hoy. Por cierto, le aviso a las personas que ahorita que nuestro invitado se sume, vamos a pasar la entrevista la vamos a hacer en inglés, porque él viene de Estados Unidos, aunque su participación justamente es en América Latina, pero bueno, vamos a cambiar ahorita a inglés. Es bien difícil hacer una traducción simultánea, entonces, bueno, una disculpa por eso, pero si tienen dudas sobre la entrevista, pues se las podemos contestar después en redes sociales. Cuéntanos ahora sí acerca de Conrod, nuestro invitado del día de hoy.
Sí, la verdad que Juan es muy interesante y la verdad que, bueno, quisimos incluir a Conrod porque Conrod acaba de asumir el Managing Director de MSD en Chile, ¿no? De una farmacia, tema de laboratorios, farmacia tan importante, además con el COVID, todo lo que está ocurriendo en el mundo. Es una persona americana que va a querer transformar mucho, eso dice él, las estrategias de impacto en la empresa. Es una persona que además es joven, con muchísimas ganas de realmente atravesar este liderazgo responsable que la empresa necesita. Y aparte que él ya viene del World Economic Forum de estar ahí con gente joven. O sea, me encantó cuando lo conocí en Chile. Dije, uy, Conrod, te queremos tener en nuestro podcast. Dijo que sí, efectivamente, como dice Juan, tiene que ser en inglés. Y tiene mucha trayectoria en el mundo de la farmacéutica, laboratorio, y le encanta la inclusión, la diversidad, liderazgo responsable y todo lo que nos va a contar él en su minuto. Así que sí, muy contenta de tener a Conrod Kelly con nosotros.
Exactamente, es un gran privilegio y ahora sí vamos a dar la bienvenida. Let's welcome Conrod, who is ready all the way from Philadelphia in the US. Hello, Conrod, how are you today?
Good. Great to be with you guys. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're very happy and we're honored to have you here. We've actually, with Rosa and other members of the BMW Foundation Leadership Group, we've talked about how social innovation is working in many different industries. I think we've talked about, Rosa, in telecom, we've talked about in consumer products, in water, in finance, but we actually haven't talked about how social innovation and responsible leadership is working out in pharma, in the health industry. So I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. with you. So thank you for being with us. And I think in the end, the US is a big part of business and the business ecosystem in Latin America. So it's great to have your perspective as well today here with us. Rosa, let's get started.
Yes, Conrad, happy to have you here.
Yes,
so many weeks speaking about having you here in this program from the Leadership from BMB Foundation with Juan. And it's very important for us, as Juan told you, about speaking about social innovation, responsible leadership. And I can tell to the audience that when I met Conrad, like not in a working time, and I know him, I told him about this program. I said, I want to have you here. And he told me, of course, if you want me to have you here, I will be. So thank you, Conrad, because I know that you are full of meetings. He's working between Chile and United States, having many meetings. It's not easy to be in the United States and live in Chile. I know that, but he's doing a great job. And just to start, Juan, if we can start, speak with you, Conrad, asking you, what is for you a responsible leadership? What is that word?
How do you define it? How do you define responsible leadership?
Sure. I think that's a really great question. And maybe the second time I've been asked that in my career, which is a bit disappointing, because I do think when you think about leadership, you have to think about responsibility and the power and the privilege that you have and sit in that position. And so for me, when I think about responsible leadership, it's about making the decisions. It's about creating the culture, setting the expectation of making sure that everything that we do aligns to the values of the company. It aligns to making sure we're doing what's best for society. And we're making sure that the decisions that we make actually have a positive impact to leave things better than the way that we found it. And to me, that is really what is the responsible leadership, not only for the individual, but also responsible leadership for an entire corporation and industry.
I love that, to leave things better than the way we found them, which is not always the case, and it's not something that we should take for granted, right? I mean, not all companies and not all people in leadership positions have that view, because we come from a culture where businesses and leadership used to be, focused on themselves and focused on their shareholders, but not especially, not maybe obviously in everybody around, all the stakeholders around the organizations. And you cannot talk about being a responsible leadership if not everyone is better off than they were before. If you are affecting somebody, then you're not really fulfilling that role. You've been working, Conrad, in pharma and in different industries. I don't want to go through all of the companies that you've worked, but you have experience since 2004 working on different corporations, on different, especially in the health sector, although I see that you also are part of the STEM advisory committee, so you're also focusing on education. You are you're part of the advisory council of the World Economic Forum as a young global leader. So you do embody this action of responsible leadership, not only in your work, outside of it as well. And how do you to then get ahead with the questions, but just to kind of close the image on you and your role, how do you say, how can I ask this? Like, what is the role of a responsible leader to go beyond their scope of immediate work? Because you may be, just doing your job in a company, but a responsible leader normally gets involved in other stuff outside of their work, right?
Absolutely. I think it's such a great question. And for me, what I try to do is what you see in my engagement with the World Economic Forum, with these other nonprofit organizations, is I try to make myself a permanent student. You never graduate from learning. And what I like about always being someone that's involved in different aspects and being committed to learning is that you're signing up for a lifetime of humility. It's a lifetime of saying, I don't know the answer to all the questions. And I think as a leader, being a responsible leader, that's another part of being a responsible leader, is feeling very comfortable saying, I don't know the answer. And to seek first to understand before you try to be understood. And so for me, by consistently putting myself in places to be uncomfortable, then that allows me to be a better leader because I'm learning from those stakeholders that you mentioned before. So whether it's, not unfortunate, but in the business world, it's investors, it's your customers, it's your suppliers, it's employees, it's the communities, it's governments. The more that you're able to listen to these different stakeholders as a leader, you're then able to start to pull together a framework that says, this is how I can start to make some decisions and some changes that can have a meaningful impact across all of these different stakeholders. And so for me, that's why it's so important to be engaged in so many different, I would say ecosystems, because if you're going to solve any problem, which is what you ask leaders to do, if you don't understand the ecosystem and how they're all interconnected, by solving one problem, you could be potentially creating a new one. So for me, that's really why I try to shape my career and be involved in that way.
I love it, Conrad. I think it's amazing, and I love this concept of always being a student, because that involves a lot of humility and a lot of keeping your feet on the ground all the time, and from that stems a lot of these other concepts and the base for a responsible leadership. Rosa, let's get on with the questions.
Yes, it's incredible what Conrad is telling us about the listening, listening and going in other steps beyond your work, no? In your experience, Conrad, what changes should the current business leadership show to generate real and tangible social environmental impact in the way of doing business?
Well, I think it's a good segue to what we just talked about, which is the most important thing that you have to do is to identify who's your most important stakeholder. And then to also understand, why personally for you is this idea of corporate social responsibility or corporate social investing, why is that actually important to them? And I think once you're able to know the why, then it's easier to move on to the what and the how. And so by being able to really understand the overlap within these different stakeholders, what a leader can do then is to start to prioritize those areas and make sure there's alignment between the company's mission, strategy, and values. And in my experience, what I've seen is that's a step that is often overlooked because the corporate social investment actually requires a long-term commitment, and you need to have that support that can stand the test of time, because the intent of doing so is being able to create long-term value, not only for the company, but also for society. And so what I've found in my role and what I'm trying to do in my leadership role here at MSD Chile is to be able to integrate our social responsibility into the business and to understand how we're having a societal impact as well as a business impact, but also broadening our lens to think about innovation and think about our employee engagement and retention. Because when there's integration, that really allows us to make sure there's focus, that we have the right resources there, that we can actually measure the impact that we're having. And as a leader, most importantly, there's accountability. And when all of those things start to come together, and for me, this is the benefit of investing and using those terminology, you start to see new solutions, new products, new services, new markets arise. And by doing so, I think it creates the pull to bring more organizations to think in this way and to behave in this way. But first of all, it starts with listening and understanding the solutions, bringing everyone together and making sure that it's integrated, so that the key in this world is, as you guys know, there's sustainability. Because the most dangerous thing that you can do as a corporation is to pop in and then walk away. And sometimes you do more damage by elevating and lifting expectations and leaving than not getting engaged at all. And that's always the concern that I have as a leader, is to make sure once we actually lean in, that we continue to stay there and support it until we see the results that we expect.
Wow. Juan, long-term value for the company. We love that.
No,
right?
I love it because it's a big change. It's a big switch from what used to be, social responsibility, what used to be a more paternalistic, or assistentialistic. I don't know if that's how you say it. Like these one shots of doing these donations or doing these like corporate programs. And you would go in, do your job, get out of the community, get out of the ecosystem, and hope for the best. And you see that in a lot of places. In the long term, this doesn't work, and communities are not sustainable, and solutions don't last. And like, how has and we're going to talk more eventually about practices, but how is it that you, especially in an industry like yours, bring other people to this? Because I imagine that a lot of people have to be on board with this long-term vision, and it might be questioned a lot by some shareholders or CEOs who say, no, we have to bring short-term value. But this sounds like it will bring value, but maybe in the longer term. So how do you balance this stuff out, these forces?
Well, I think you ask a great question, and it's why it needs to start at the very top of the organization, right? From the board to the CEO, because there's been a huge shift now in the industry where those leaders are not being necessarily held accountable just on their ability to deliver short-term results, but it's also long-term results. And when you think about, a market in healthcare, as an example, the majority of the populations that are where the greatest unmet need exists in health sit in these lower middle income countries. And so if companies are going to be asked to deliver long-term growth and to find new opportunities, those opportunities are going to come from these markets. And so as an organization, if you don't have the infrastructure, if you don't have health literacy, if you have inequitable access to healthcare and screening and medicines, we're never going to be able to achieve long-term growth because you're going to oversaturate in those developed markets. And so I think the way that we've been able to get this commitment is that now with a long-term value mindset from the boards, from investors, from the street, now that it creates, I would say, a safety net for companies to say, this is how I'm investing in creating long-term value. And I think what you find in this situation, and hopefully we'll get into this in the conversation, is that to the point I mentioned earlier, I think where companies have made a mistake is that they assume that just having the resources is how you're going to solve it. And they miss that important step of listening and understanding what the true issues are. And the best way to understand what the true issues are connecting with organizations like Empathy, is working with NGOs, is to having those people that have their feet and their hands and their ears to the street and in those communities to say, this is how you can be of value, but we need a collection of people in order to be able to solve this. Because if you try to just solve the one issue that you see, you might be actually creating additional issues that were unbeknownst to you because you didn't take the time to listen, or you didn't involve and bring in other stakeholders that have a better understanding of some of the other issues that have been bubbling up over time. And so for me, that's why it's so important for corporations to be able to build these relationships with those stakeholders, to listen and to get their permission of where is it appropriate for us to be able to intervene. Because you and I both know, you see a multinational corporation coming in, immediately there's a heightened level of skepticism of why is this important to you? And I think that gets back to my point earlier, where instead of shying away from it, you need to make it clear that the reason we care about health equity is because we are in the business of saving and improving lives. We're not going to shy away from that. That is what our company does. That is what our industry does. But if we can't make sure that people can access the medicines, afford the medicines, get the timely diagnosis and treatment, then our medicines have no value. Our innovation add no value. And so I think it's important for companies to be very forthright about why they're there and to make sure it aligns with their mission and vision, because that's the sign to the community that you can commit for the long term, because it's what your mission and vision ask you to do as an organization.
It makes a lot of sense, because the nature of your work, as you already mentioned, is to improve people's lives, to improve people's health. But it can get sidetracked. It can get sidetracked if you don't have this strong leadership and strong vision. And I love this question, this answer, because it connects as well with what you were saying about learning, and always have that humility of keep learning. And I think it applies for leaders, but it also applies to organizations or corporations as well, to have this attitude of always be learning and not learning, because I don't know, because the clients and the communities you work with have new problems now that what they did 20 years ago. So if you had a formula 20 years ago that worked, it doesn't mean that it's working just as the same, because everything around it and everything around people's health has changed as well.
Exactly.
So the condition of people is not same, and therefore you should always be listening. And I want to point out one last thing before I turn it over to Rosa for the next question. that I love that you mentioned that we should start measuring success for boards and for CEOs, not only in short term, because in the short term it's very simple to measure, and then you have the value of the shares, and you have the annual revenue, and so you have this very short term measures of success.
Yeah.
But if we start measuring or implementing ways to measure how the impact of the long-term decisions that you're going to make, I think it would definitely change how people lead and how people run these organizations. And I think that's a very interesting conversation. No? How do we start implementing now ways to measure the potential impact of your decisions in the future, and we incorporate that to the measurement of your work. And I think that would bring all of this into a very interesting conversation. Rosa, do you have the next question for Conrod?
Yes, he answered many questions already, but well, I will try. I will try.
Sure.
In this journey, in this trip, which limitations have you in your different works or right now?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have limitations, I can imagine, Conrad. Can you tell us some?
Sure. So, I think we've touched on some of them, and it was mentioned earlier by Juan, which is you can find companies in a situation where they think of this as mostly philanthropy, or there's product donations, or we come in, we do a volunteer program or some type of corporate marketing, and then we leave. But what you realize what these are a very disconnected set of initiatives and activities that, yes, while it might make it easier to execute and people feel good, there's a great photo op, it's really difficult to narrow down how did you actually solve the societal problem in a sustainable way, right? Did you create opportunities? Did you, make sure that there was resources that could be there for the long haul? And so what I find with some of those approaches, and back to the short term versus long term, is that you have this dilemma of balancing the societal and the financial objectives. So that's one of the challenges or the limitations, is how do you actually talk about the investment you're making and how it's having a societal impact and a financial impact. The other one that I've seen and I've faced personally and was able to overcome, but it's this idea of legitimacy, right? So if you're working in this space and you're pursuing this corporate social innovation and you're looking at philanthropic activities, it's saying, well, should you as a company take that money that you're investing in societal, should that be invested in the business? And when you show up to engage with these NGOs or working with governments, the question is, do you really care about society, or is that mostly a profit-driven initiative? And so what I've found sometimes is you don't put the right person in that place that can balance the understanding of both the internal and the external environment to make sure that you can make the business case internally of why you need to invest, but also to be able to make that case to these external environments to be able to gain their trust. Because it's one thing for me to say, hey, you should just listen, but you have to be invited into the room to be able to hear the conversation. And often that's a limitation. And if I can think of one other one, and I mentioned it earlier, it's just the complexity of doing this work. I hope in no way do I seem that I'm oversimplifying what is a very complex situation that you face when you try to do this work, again, because they're so interconnected. And so, what's important, I believe, for companies is that often because of resources, they limit themselves to one area. But I think what the opportunity is, and especially pursuing social innovation and funding, is that if you do this with other players in the ecosystem, you can magnify the impact. And so that's one of the areas that I think it's so important, is to find different ways to fund these initiatives through a collective, instead of saying, I'm going to pick this one issue and I'm going to fund this one thing for a short period of time, because in my experience, it's been very difficult to see any long-term impact from companies who've taken that approach.
You mentioned very interesting points there. I think that, well, first of all, and in these conversations, it's come up the subject of how these strategies and this vision of innovation, of social innovation, has to come from the leaders. But just until you mention it, that if you don't have the right person, then this will not be implemented. Yeah. I don't think I had connected the dots in saying that this then drives social innovation and responsible leadership, drives even your hunt for talent and your human resources strategies, because then you're not going to be hiring people and bring people to leadership roles that don't align with that. Because the worst case in any of these organizations would be to step back from all the hard work that you've done trying to build this culture and this vision of the social innovation. And if you hire the wrong person, the person that doesn't align with these values, then it's going to, it's going to be a step back, or it's going to take a longer term, because it's hard for people to, if you don't have it in you. I don't want to say that nobody that you are born into, a social responsibility personality, but if you don't have it, then the company has to do a bigger work to align you to those values. Absolutely. And you mentioned a couple of other things that I want to mention as well, and I don't know if I'm going to remember them all, but I love the part about collaboration, for example, which I think it's key. And I remember they're both that actually kind of go together. First of all, there are no formulas. There are not easy formulas that you can implement, and because we cannot go out and look in the world. They already solved these sustainability issues or these health issues. We can see for sure examples, powerful examples, but the formulas are not there to. For example, there are marketing formulas, there are sales formulas, but there are not social impact formulas, because every community, every social issue is different. Exactly. So I think that since there are no formulas, you have to be trying, and you have to be taking risks, and you have to have a long-term vision. But I love how that connects to collaboration, because I don't think that any one organization or one company can solve an issue by itself, on its own. But it has to collaborate with others, especially those who would normally seem as competitors. Because I think, how do you say this? But negative competition in businesses has even sometimes widened the breach of social issues or sustainability. So now we have to take a step back and collaborate to close those gaps. And I love that vision. I love that. How do you put it?
And if I could add one more thing to that, is if you take the investment, which I love, again, the fact that investment and innovation is entering into this sphere, because if you think about investments, one of the things you do in investment to de-risk an investment is you create a fund, right? And so you're investing in multiple different stocks or other vehicles, so that if one goes down,
you
can be offset by the other one. And so it's so important for us to think about this, that historically the challenge was, if I invest in this, there's a lot of risk. Now you're saying, well, great, there's no investment that comes without risk, but I can de-risk my investment by pooling my resources and placing multiple bets on different solutions. And maybe one of those solutions might produce something that then can be scaled, that you can start to get a return on that investment that can allow you to continue to have the sustainability. And so I think it's so important, again, of the right profile of the individual to work in this space, who can understand the social issues and the political frameworks, but then also understand the business landscape to be able to toe the line between both sides of the business.
I love that. Thank you so much, Conrad. And Rosa, do you have more questions for Conrad?
Yes, I would like to know, Conrad, we are speaking about Latam right now. Do you have any initiative that you have work with like impact investment, social innovation, that you can tell us, like a real one, and to know more about that initiative they're working in Latam or Chile or other country?
Sure, absolutely. So we have an impact investment organization within MSD. And, what we try to do in that group, our intent is really about trying to generate what we call mutually reinforcing social impact, but also having a financial return. And in doing so, we're making sure that we're supporting the company's priority, but we're also these other external companies that align to our strategic priorities. So let me give you, a real example. So we have an investment in Mamotes, which is really a very exciting company that's part of our ever-evolving and growing impact investment portfolio. So Mamotest is a company from Argentina, and what they do is they're trying to democratize access to healthcare by providing mammography services to help with the early detection of breast cancer. And so through their model and a digital platform, what they're able to do is actually offer this service to women in a way that is quicker, cheaper, more accurate than what's the current standard of care in many of the Latin American countries. And so last year, as MSD, we invested $1 million into Mamotest along with other investors. So again, pooling our resources to be able to help the company expand beyond their base in Argentina. Initially, I believe, was into Mexico, and now they're working and getting into other markets. And so they have plans to open in more than 50 additional locations within the next 2 years. And so if this company is successful, again, not without risk, but if they are, they can impact millions of women across these regions by actually lowering the costs for the public health and the private health and healthcare system. And so that's just one example from our impact investment portfolio. We've got over $50 million committed to other investments all around the world. But we do believe that this is the best approach to be able to grow our reach and increase our impact. And most importantly, how do you start to minimize the inequity that exists within some of these markets between those that can access the system and have the means to, and those that rely on an already taxed and strained public healthcare infrastructure?
Interesting in Argentina, that innovation. Wow. And for Chile, what do you have for Chile? What do you want to do in Chile?
For me and for Chile, what I'm really excited about is, as I'm new, and so I'm still learning more about the marketplace. But just during my most recent visit to Chile, I had an opportunity to visit three hospitals. There was Hospital de Maipú, there was the hospital in Cancer, and another hospital, San Borja. And San Borja, sorry. And with at least two of those hospitals, it was focused on cancer. And when you look at cancer specifically in Chile, it's the number 2 cause of death overall, but it's growing, where it has the potential to become the number 1 leading cause of death. And a part of why that is an issue, in Chile is because that you're having to have the infrastructure needed to be able to manage the growth of cancer. And I'm sure we'll talk about it here. And Rosa, you and I have spoken about it before, that cancer is not just purely genetic. It comes from these social determinants of health. So it has to do with education. It has to do with your environmental factors. It has to do with nutrition. It has to do with exercise, smoking, access to healthcare. It's a multifactorial disease. And if you really want to be able to be able to impact cancer, especially in Chile, it's great to have these life-saving innovations, but they're not actually able to reach people early enough because the infrastructure isn't there to support them. Number 1, having knowledge about the right behaviors to prevent it. Number 2, to make sure they can get access to screening and diagnostics tools to make sure they get the early diagnosis. And then also to make sure that you have early treatment, because as an industry, we've made significant progress where people can actually survive a cancer diagnosis. But if they're showing up so late when the disease is so progressed, the medicines don't have the ability to maximize their full potential. And so for me, part of that is finding ways to work together to address these things that are low cost. Education is low cost. Awareness is low cost. But then we need to find other partnerships to make sure that there's not a huge wait for people to be able to see oncologists, that there's more oncologists there, that we educate the primary care providers to know what to look for so they can spot things earlier. But on our side, our responsibility and what we're trying to do in Chile is to work with different partners within the system to say, how can we make care more equitable and how can we make it more affordable? Because we know what the government is dealing. We know the challenges they're facing. We see the work they've done to fight this pandemic. But a part of being able to really create the budget headroom to be able to fight these diseases like cancer is you have to take a very different approach, an ecosystem approach, but you also have to do more around the areas of prevention. And if I could just briefly, one of the things that I'm so excited about, and I think Chile is a gold standard on this, is the fact that Chile has really adopted a very aggressive approach towards immunizing people and immunization. And now you have vaccines that you can get 2 shots or 3 shots, and they can actually prevent people from getting cervical cancer. And so that's the type of partnerships that we need to be able to continue to have. And what I'm very excited about in terms of investing in Chile is to know that through vaccination and through earlier education and prevention and diagnosis and treatment, you can actually create an environment in Chile where cancer deaths actually start to decline, and where you can actually have an entire generation that is actually free of cervical cancer. And to be able to know that Chile is already on their way to do so is something that excites me every day.
And I think
I will help you. I will help you with that.
No, and I think it's a definite example for the rest of Latin America. If a country can get to that and achieve that through prevention and through all of these strategies, then it's a great example for the rest of us. Very different countries and very different, of course, scenarios for the different countries in Latin America. But I think it's a great and very inspiring to hear you say.
You can replicate in any country in Latin. It's very replicating.
Absolutely.
And all of it is good business, which is the best, because then it matches what you've said earlier, that this social innovation and these responsible leadership strategies have to match with the business. And if this is a good business strategy for you guys, then it's profitable and it's sustainable in the long term to implement and grow to other countries where MSD or other companies healthcare companies are working at.
Absolutely. Could I add one more thing about Chile?
Of course, yes.
That I think is so important is when most people from outside of Chile, they think of Chile, it's a high income country in Latin America. It's a member of the OECD countries, right? But one of the things that I've discovered is that Chile also has the widest margin of inequality of all of the OECD countries. And this notion of inequity is so important because those are systemic issues, right? You're born into those systemic issues. It wasn't a genetic issue that created the inequity. And inequity is measurable. It's tangible. You can use data to be able to see where certain variables create a better environment for health for others and create a worse environment for health for another group. And so, I think it's something we'll talk about in a second, but one of the things that I do believe that the society, the changes in our business world and technology has allowed is the democratization of data. And I think that's the piece that has to be a part of any corporate social investment, innovation approach. Is you have to be able to use data to be able to drive change. And as someone said to me once before, and I've never forgotten it, they say, never tell a story without data and never show data without a story. And I think that's something that, I've learned just learning more about Rosa, is that she can tell you the personal story of what's happening in the community, but it's always backed up and reinforced by data. And I think that's a unique trait that we need to have in order to make sure that this can be sustainable, that it's not just the data, but make sure that there's the personal stories that help to bring it to life. Because at the end of the day, we're all emotional people by nature. And while data can pique your interest, nothing moves you to action more than a powerful emotional story.
I think it's a great way to close this conversation, because I think it's the perfect balance between taking the romantic part out of the equation, not completely, but maybe not taking it out, but not focusing. A lot of the times when you're working on social impact or sustainability, you think it's enough to tell the romantic story and to be engaging and to cry on camera and show people how bad things are. But I think after all these years, we kind of know that. But if you back up that with data, then it's a strong case, and it's a strong to it's stronger to bring more people in and to create more collaboration and to create movements, which all of these social issues and sustainability issues have to do. And this is what eventually inspires people to become responsible leaders, which is, I hope, the goal that we're trying to set here, to bring more responsible leaders into these conversations through these interviews. Conrod, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a great, you've opened our eyes a lot. We have a lot of takeaways from this conversation. Rosa, thank you so much for getting us in touch with Conrod, bringing him to the conversation. This was definitely worth it. And I hope also we have a lot of people from our audience listening to us. I know sometimes the English translation is not the easiest, but we're here and we've learned a lot. Rosa, do you want to?
Yes, no, thank you, Conrod. I think that a lot of findings are a summary of listening, to know the context. Each country is different.
Yeah.
To work bottom up. There are a lot of systematic problems that you have to look how to solve it. This long value view. We know, and Juan, sometimes Latin America, the enterprises have short view in their approaches. So thank you for being here, for your time. I know that you are very busy, so thank you really to know more about your leadership, about your work, about your strategies, about your dreams that are our dreams also.
Thank you. And if I could just add one final thing just to close, one of the reasons that I choose to work at a company like MSD is, if I look at our pipeline, 88% of the top 20 global burdens of disease are addressed by our portfolio.
Wow.
88%. 88% of the top 20 global burden diseases are impacted by our portfolio. But at the end of the day, again, none of that means anything if we can't make sure that people get access to them. And if they can't reach those people that are either in those lower middle income countries or the populations. And so all I ask is that I know sometimes the industry doesn't get the best reputation, but only by inviting us in and allowing us to listen and allowing us to learn and working together, can we go from being, viewed as a part of the problem and being seen as a key contributor as to be a part of the solution. So thank you guys for inviting me into this space and for allowing me to continue to learn from you all. And I look forward to the continued partnership to really advance a much more health equity in Chile and the rest of the world.
Awesome. No, I'm sure we'll be talking again. We've actually collaborated in Mexico with Mamotest and probably with other companies in your portfolio. So it's great to finally get to know you, and hopefully a lot of great things will come out of this conversation. Thank you so much, Conrod. It's easy to, you probably have this all the time. Thank you so much, Conrod. Thank you so much, Rosa. Y muchísimas gracias a toda la comunidad.
Seguimos.
De Disruptivo, aquí estamos, como no. Les agradecemos por habernos escuchado. Muchas gracias a la Fundación BMW, a Empathy, a Social Lab, a Sistema B y a todos ustedes que nos ayudan y que nos acompañan en estas conversaciones. Muchísimas gracias. Nos escuchamos en la siguiente entrevista de Innovación Social Corporativa y Liderazgo Responsable aquí en Disruptivo. Hasta pronto.
Gracias, chao. Bye.
Chao.
Thank you.
¿Qué te pareció esta conversación? Yo personalmente aprendí muchísimo. Si quieres continuar con el aprendizaje y entrar un poquito más en los detalles de lo que platicamos, no solo con el líder del día de hoy, sino con todos los líderes de esta serie de Innovación Social Corporativa y Liderazgo Responsable, recuerda que puedes entrar a la página disruptivo.tv/Innovación Social Corporativa y descargar completamente gratis el ebook en el que se recopilan los principales aprendizajes de estas 10 entrevistas. Me encantaría saber lo que opinas tú sobre el tema en redes sociales, así que escríbeme en @delcerrojuan en todas las redes o @disruptivotv. Te escuchamos y conversemos así juntos sobre innovación social corporativa y liderazgo responsable.